نستغفره ونحمد به توكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له أما بعد وإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وخير هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. As we approach the end of the year 1446 after Hijrah, I want us to take some time to reflect on why does our calendar begin with the Hijrah? This is a very interesting question. Many of us are under the assumption that the calendar that we follow is completely divinely revealed. And the reality is the months are revealed. The months are mentioned, that there are 12 months and certain months are holy. This is something that is part of revelation. What many people don't realize is that in the first 10 to 15 years after the Hijrah, there was no Hijri calendar. Right? The calendar was just months. It would be Muharram, and then it would be next month, and the next month. The year actually didn't have a beginning or an end. It's just a cycle of 12 months. And this started to get very confusing as the Ummah grew, as it became a civilization and an empire. It became difficult to document things, to chronicle things without an actual calendar. You see, in the early years, there were small communities. Small communities could get away with just having a smaller version of what we would call a calendar. But once the Ummah became an empire, it needed something more substantial. And so it was in the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, when he was the Khalifa, that disputes began to happen. Someone would say, for example, that he promised to pay me in Muharram. And the other person would say, well, I wasn't talking about this Muharram, I'm talking about next Muharram. Then they would be like, when did you sign the contract? In Ramadan. Which Ramadan? Things started to get confusing. And so multiple people, they suggested to Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, let us have a calendar like how other nations have calendars. And so there are multiple narrations about this. It is narrated by At-Tabari that a legal document was delivered to Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu in which it had the month of Sha'ban mentioned. And Umar asked, is this the upcoming Sha'ban or the previous Sha'ban? Nobody knew. So Umar radiallahu anhu said, we need to figure out a way to document these things. Likewise, letters would be received by Umar ibn al-Khattab, they had no dates. So Umar gathered his advisors and said, we need to have a calendar. And so they had a discussion on where should the calendar begin from and what should the calendar be based on. Eventually they agreed upon that the calendar should be based upon the Hijrah. So it is stated that some of the people suggested that the calendar should begin with the first revelation. Others said the birth of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Others said the passing of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Umar radiallahu anhu said, we will start the calendar from the Hijrah. Because the Hijrah is what separated truth from falsehood. This was the reason of Umar ibn al-Khattab. The Hijrah was the defining moment of the Seerah. Right? Our Seerah is literally divided into before Hijrah and after Hijrah. Even Revelation is divided into before Hijrah and after Hijrah. This is the defining moment of our history, of our Seerah. In the third narration is mentioned that a man came to Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu and said that we need a calendar. So Umar radiallahu anhu said, how would we calculate it? He said, well, the other nations, they have years, So Umar radiallahu anhu said, okay, we'll have years. When shall we begin with? So people discussed. Eventually they agreed upon the Hijrah. Then they discussed when shall the year begin. Some said Ramadan. Others said Muharram. Eventually they settled upon Muharram because the year would end with the Hajj. Right? This was the logic of the Sahaba. Every year would end with the Hajj, and as the Hajjis return home, it is a new year. So there's 2 points I want us to take from this. Number one, understand that our calendar is a matter of ijtihad and ijma. It is something that the Sahaba came up with and they agreed upon and we follow it. But the real point I want us to get to is that they all agreed that the calendar should begin with the hijrah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam from Makkah to Madinah, which is very unique. It's very unique. When you look at the calendars of any other nations, it's normally somebody's birth, somebody's death. It's normally some event like that that the calendar is built around. Like the main calendar we use is built around what the Christians say, when Jesus left, right? This is like what they build the current calendar, 2025 years since the time of Jesus, right? And most calendars are built like that. The Islamic calendar is unique because it's built around the Hijrah. And by the way, this wasn't the first Hijrah. This is actually the third Hijrah. Because there were a group of Sahaba who made Hijrah to Abyssinia, and then there were a second group of Sahaba that made Hijrah to Abyssinia. So the Hijrah to Madinah was actually the third Hijrah, but it is the defining Hijrah. So today I wanted to just take a look at why. Why is the Hijrah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam so important, and what effect did it have on this world? When we look at the history of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we can divide it into two periods: before Hijrah and after Hijrah. Before Hijrah, the Ummah was in a state of weakness. The Ummah was very small. There were less than 100 believers. Today there's 2 billion Muslims. Before Hijrah, there were less than 100 believers. And there were two small groups. One was a minority in Abyssinia, who were treated well by the government of Abyssinia, and the other was the minority in Makkah, who were oppressed. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was in Makkah. They faced persecution from the people of Makkah, from the people of Taif, and from other tribes around them as well. After Hijrah, everything changes. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam moves from a land where he is part of a persecuted minority to a land where he is now the ruler. He is now the default ruler. He arrives in Madinah and the people of Madinah make him their leader. And he now has a community. He now has a base. He now has an army. He now has the building blocks of civilization. And what happens after this is a miracle. What happens after this is a proof of prophethood. What happens after this is the most miraculous rise of a nation in human history. At the time of Hijrah, there are around 100 Muslims. The Hijrah sets in place a series of events that lead to the victory upon victory for the Muslims. Badr, Uhud is a small setback. Ahzab, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, until within 9 years, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam goes back to Makkah as a conqueror. And he conquers Makkah with an army of 10,000 people. 100 to 10,000 in 10 years. And he doesn't stop there. This leads to a snowball effect. The Muslims then conquer the rest of Arabia. And then they conquer parts of the Roman Empire and all of the Zoroastrian Persian Empire. Until within 100 years, from Spain all the way to the borders of China, are now a Muslim empire. This is a miracle. No other nation in history grew that fast and then sustained itself for over 1,000 years. But it all started with one simple thing. Something that seems so small and it seems like a small part of the story. A man moves from one city to another. It doesn't sound like that big a deal, right? Somebody's moving from one city to another. Yet often it is these small things, or these seemingly small things, that make all the difference in the world. Because in Makkah, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was surrounded by a group of elders who were stubborn in their disbelief and were willing to persecute anyone who believed. Madinah was a very different society. Madinah, at that time, it was called Yathrib. It actually wasn't a city like how we see it today. Right? Medina wasn't a city. Yathrib was actually a group of small fortresses and villages. So each tribe had their own little village, and each Jewish tribe had their own little fortress. It wasn't a united community, right? It was patches of communities, all of which were fighting each other. Right? There were two Arab tribes living there, the Aus and the Khazraj, and they were constantly at war with each other. What ended this war? Islam. Both groups convert to Islam and they become Islam. Now, the unique things about Medina that made it special at that time and the right place to start a community from. Number one was that it didn't have the set rulership like Makkah had. Makkah had these elders, they were in power, they're not going to let go of their power. Medina, the war between the Aus and the Khazraj had wiped out all of the elders. It was now just young people left in charge. And they're looking for a way to make peace. They're looking for new solutions. They're looking for a new way forward. They are more open and receptive to the message. Number two, Makkah is a small town at that time where everybody knows each other and it's basically just one tribe. And Medina is a group of different villages, each with their own community, a variety of different religions. And it's easier there to move in, settle in one of those villages and become its leaders. Right? And so Rasulullah becomes the leader over the Aus and the Khazraj, and over time that expands and becomes all of Medina. So Medina was the right place at the right time, for which the building blocks of civilization could have been built. And from there, we see Islam spreading. And the Hijrah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam brought about many changes that impact the world until today. Number one, it brought victory to Islam. It brought victory to the Muslims. The Muslims went from a group who were oppressed, they had no army, they had no weapons, they had no way to fight back. They went from an oppressed group to a mighty army. They became the mightiest of armies of that time. And we see with Badr and Uhud and Ahzab and everything after that, armies led by the likes of Khalid ibn Walid. This became the ummah of victory. But it started with just a strategic moving from one land to another. Number two, moving to Medina led to the birth of the first Muslim community. We now have a Muslim community, a place where you have the masjid and you have a community built around the masjid, and the people of that community all follow Islam. And so this now becomes the land of Islam, Darul Islam. And Darul Islam will expand. Starting with Medina, it will eventually become all of Arabia and eventually become a large portion of the world. It all starts with the Hijrah. But number three, it's not just the foundations of a Muslim society, but also community in the sense of uniting the hearts of people. And so what would previously have been very disunited people, you have the Quraysh of Makkah, you have the Aus of Medina, you have the Khazraj of Medina, you have the Jews of Medina. Now you have believers from all these different groups who are united upon Islam. And this now becomes a uniting factor amongst people who previously would never have been united. And this is now where we see the building blocks of community. You hear the stories of the Muhajirin going to Makkah and the Ansar offering them their wealth and their homes. This is community. This is the first start of what a Muslim community looks like. Number four, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam moving to Medina was the beginning of Islam spreading outside of that small circle. Before that, Islam is in Makkah and maybe a small group in Abyssinia. But with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam now based in Medina, he can send missionaries out to do da'wah to different parts of the world, to such an extent that he wrote letters to the kings of the different regions. And now Islam starts to spread outside of Arabia as well. Number five, the Hijrah led to the revelation of the Sharia, Allah's perfect final law for humanity to follow. Before Hijrah, there was no Sharia per se. A small persecuted minority without any power cannot enforce a law. And so Islam in the early years, it was beliefs and it was salah. And you had a few basic moral principles. Be good to your parents, be generous. There wasn't a Sharia. The Sharia is revealed after Hijrah, piece by piece. And this is why when you read the Madinah surahs, the surahs revealed after Hijrah, like Surah Baqarah and Surah Nur and Surah Ma'idah, you see the Sharia is revealed in these surahs. And so the Sharia is linked to Hijrah. The Hijrah gave Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam enough power over a community that they could now have a state law that is revealed by God. A law that Muslims would follow at the government level until 100 years ago and follow at a personal level right until today. We don't have any government today that practice Sharia, but we all follow it, right, on a personal level. Number 6 is that the Hijrah led to a series of conquests that were unheard of in human history. And I already mentioned this earlier. First came Makkah, and then comes Hunain and Taif, and then the rest of Arabia, and then the Persian Empire, and then Syria, and then Palestine, and then Egypt, and then North Africa, and then India, and then Spain. Within 100 years, all of that land is Darul Islam. But it starts with a single man moving from one city to another. This starts the snowball effect of jihad and conquest that leads to Islam becoming a dominant civilizational superpower. Number 7, the Hijrah brought honor and power to people who were previously oppressed. We look at people, for example, like Bilal radiallahu anhu. In Makkah, he was from an oppressed minority. In Madinah, he becomes a leader of society. And he ends up living a very dignified life as a leader. Anyone know where Bilal radiallahu anhu is buried? Palestine. Buried in Palestine. Right? He became a leader of the Mujahideen who went out and conquered Syria and Palestine. A man who previously would have been nothing. Right? The Arabs would have looked at him as nothing. Islam elevated his rank. The same with Salman al-Farsi. Salman al-Farsi was a slave of the Jews in Medina. He passes away as a leader of Persia. This event of Rasulullah moving to Medina leads to a snowball effect of events that leads to people who previously would have been oppressed becoming the leaders of the world. Number 9, the Hijrah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam established Islam as a dominant force on earth in 2 ways. And it's because this is the only time in history where somebody was established as a dominant force on earth in 2 ways. Both the political and the religious. You know, when Michael Hart wrote his book on the 100 most influential people in the world, and people were confused why he put Prophet Muhammad at number 1 even though he was a Christian, he said this is the only man in history who succeeded in both realms. The only man in history who succeeded in building a civilization and establishing a religion. Because Islam became both with the Hijrah. Before Hijrah, Islam was a religion. After Hijrah, it becomes civilizational power and a dominant religion. Finally, the Hijrah was the end of the plotting of the Quraysh to be able to destroy Islam. After that, their plots had no effect. Before Hijrah, there's always this worry they're going to kill everybody, they're going to genocide everybody, they're going to wipe everybody out. After Hijrah, the Muslims begin to win, and the main force stopping Islam from spreading is eliminated, and Islam begins to spread, and the final religion was here to stay, and it will remain until the end of time. And so the Hijrah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is perhaps the single most important event in our history. We do not study it enough. We do not reflect on it enough. We need to make more time to sit and just study this single event. What led to the Hijrah? What are the events that opened the doors to Madinah? Why Madinah? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has sent people to many different regions. Why Madinah? What happened that made Madinah a place worth moving to? How did they move? What the journey was like? There's lessons in every aspect of it. We do not study it enough. The Sahaba understood the significance of this move. The Sahaba understood the importance of the Hijrah. This is why when the Sahaba said, "Oh, Umar ibn al-Khattab, let us have a calendar," and they argued, What should this calendar be based on? What was his answer? He said, we base it on the Hijrah because the Hijrah separated truth from falsehood. We ask Allah to make us from those who understand the religion properly and follow it properly. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. الحمد لله وحده والصلاة والسلام على من لا نبي بعد أما بعد فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وخير هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. One of the main lessons we take from the Hijrah is that sometimes it's the smallest of actions that can completely turn around the status of a community. That those who were oppressed and become victorious through small strategies, things that other people may consider insignificant. These strategies could change things completely. And the Hijrah of Rasulullah turned Islam into a civilizational superpower. And it would remain so until 100 years ago. For 1,300 years, Islam and Muslims were considered the dominant force on earth. This was a very, very long run in human history. And 100 years ago, World War I takes place. The Ottoman Empire loses, Muslims lose their power, and people assume that this is the end of Islam. People assume that now Muslims will leave their religion in large numbers. They'll become secular. They'll become like the West. People thought we force secularism on them, they will leave Islam. And they thought Islam will collapse. The power and miracle of Islam is even for this 100 years without the superpower, without the civilizational powers, Islam is still the fastest growing religion on earth. In fact, it's growing even faster than any other point in history. And this baffles people. This baffles people. I'm going to give you very recent statistics that just came out a few weeks ago. Right? Stated that between 2010 and 2020, the global population of Muslims rose from 23% to 25%. This means that we are now a quarter of the world. A quarter of the world are followers of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The same man who, when he made Hijrah, had around 100 followers with him making Hijrah. Now a quarter of the world follows him. And it's growing. It's not shrinking, it's growing. What's fascinating is that the majority of Muslims are young, under the age of 24. This is very different from other nations today because one of the biggest worries in lands like Japan and the United Kingdom is that most of the people are old. They don't have enough young people. We don't have this problem. Alhamdulillah, we have a lot of young people. So this ummah will continue to grow. And so the growth of Islam was there were four things that were linked to the growth of Islam, right? In the survey done by non-Muslims. Number one is that there are a lot of young people, right? So this actually makes a difference for the future projection growth rates. Number two, high fertility rates. Muslims still make the most babies, right? Not as much as our parent generation were, but still more than everybody else. Number three is low dissatisfaction rates. People are leaving Christianity in mass. Yes, there are some people who leave Islam, but nowhere near in number compared to other religions. The majority of Muslims love Islam. And Islam is part of who we are. And it has the largest collection of people who love their religion and who follow their religion. And number four is conversion rates. This is the one religion that every day you get somebody converted to it. These four factors combined, it is estimated that by 2070, Islam will be the dominant religion on earth, the number one in numbers. To end off, I asked ChatGPT, what's the most practiced religion on earth? It got a little bit politically correct, like, it depends how you mean by practice. Technically, number, it's Christians, but if you're being honest, in terms of practicing and taking the religion seriously, it's Islam. Meaning, yes, in terms of numbers, Christians have a bit more percentage compared to Muslims. Most Christians today don't follow Christianity. Many are just culturally Christian. Many are atheists. Islam is the one religion today that not only is a quarter of the world Muslim, but we love our religion. We take our religion very seriously, and it has the largest number of practicing followers in the world. And it all goes back to one event. Rasulullah ﷺ moves from Makkah to Medina. That hijrah leads to the growth of the birth of a civilization. That civilization conquers many regions. More importantly, it conquers many hearts. And once Islam enters the hearts, it does not leave. And so today, we continue to see the barakah of the hijrah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. As even after the civilizational power of Islam fell, the spiritual power of Islam continues to grow. And it continues to conquer the hearts of people all over the world. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us from the true followers of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and from those who are part of those who spread the message of Islam. رَبَّنَا أَتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً وَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ سُبْحَانَ رَبِّكَ رَبِّ الْعِزَّةِ عَمَّا يَصِفُونَ وَسَلَامٌ عَلَى الْمُرْسَلِينَ وَالْحَمْدُ لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ.